Okay, Kunlana Block Gemara. Today is Friday. Daf Chav Hey Amud Aleph Erev Rosh Chodesh Nisan Chav Tes Adar Sheni Mishnah. Continuing with rumors. We're going to learn Masechta Gittin that if you bring a divorce, you're a shliach to bring a divorce, you have to say that I saw this get being written, and you have to say I'm a shliach, I'm a single person. There's no witnesses, but we'll give him the credibility of two witnesses. I saw the get being written, and I know, and the sign in front of me. Why? Gemara there has a machlekes Rabba and Rabba. Why? Is it because we want to make sure it's written l'shma for the base the right way, or is the reason because Ein Eidim Mitzuyim L'Kaima? If you bring a get to another country, and what happens? Somebody raises questions. How are you ever going to authenticate it? The witnesses of different countries. So we have a shliach who authenticates it for us, and we say, but in Eretz Yisrael to Bavel you don't have to, either because everyone in Eretz Yisrael knows the laws of Lishma, or because people are constantly traveling to and fro from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. I may be getting this. Somebody brings a get from overseas. But he said, before Nechtem, this is the shliach. I saw it written. I saw it sealed. He says, he shouldn't be the one to marry that divorced woman, because then tongues going to start wagging. Then maybe the whole thing is above Maisa, and it's a ruse so that he can marry her. Because relying on this person doesn't look right. What about Mace? He says your husband died. And we know that when it comes, normally you need two witnesses, but over here we're going to be lenient to help an aguna, even one witness is enough. And also because the woman will do her own homework, because she knows if the husband comes back, she's in trouble. Can't live with the husband, but then the person she married, she'll be mamzedim, so she'll do her own homework. Or what happens furthermore? He's active. I killed your husband. Or hargunu, we killed your husband. Lo says ishtay. Again, he shouldn't marry the woman. Why shouldn't he marry the woman? Because it looks like we're relying on him. Could be the whole thing is a baba maisa. But another person could marry based on that testimony, but you can't. Even though he's incriminating himself, as we'll talk about in a minute, another person can marry. Kohen says no. If he says I killed him, he's incriminating himself. I killed him. Nobody can marry that woman because a person cannot incriminate themselves, and we don't believe in the concept. We'll learn later on that there's a concept according to some Rava, palginan debura, which means if somebody says testimony and part of it is incriminating, we cut out the part that's incriminating and we rely on the rest of the testimony. So we rely that your husband is dead, has been killed, but the fact that you killed himself, that we don't believe. That's the first opinion. Now, Buddha says we don't separate the words. We take the entire testimony, we take nothing. So therefore, we say nobody can marry because we don't believe a word you're saying. And therefore, what do you call it? Raktiv, he said, I killed him, like to nothing, nobody can marry. If he said Ishta, Gunu, if he says we killed him, to nas Ishta, others can marry her, but not himself. Now, why, if he says we killed him, is any better? Lachai is incriminating himself as well. We'll see. Says the Gemara, time, the only reason is because he came from overseas and he has to say those words, we need his testimony. So since we're relying on him, it doesn't look right that he now takes advantage of that testimony. He gets personal gain from it. Obviously, that casts aspersion on his credibility. So time, we rely on him. But when it comes to Yisrael, the lava lake is we're not relying on him. He says, since when it comes to Yisrael, you don't have to say anything, you just bring a divorce. That anybody can marry his woman, except he also can marry her because he was just a mule. He didn't do anything. It's nothing to do with him. So you might understand. But Hameis, in the case where he said, your husband died, also the lava lake. Normally we never rely on single witness. How come here we are? We're not relying on him. We're relying on her that she would do her homework, she would check it out to make sure everything is authentic, everything is real. So we're not relying on him. So how come he can't marry her? Since we're not relying, what's the difference? Each of where she relies and she checks out. Tony says he shouldn't marry his wife. I mean, the is a big difference. We are relying partially on his evidence, and we assume his evidence plus the fact that she does her homework. But the way the Gemara seems to be learning here is we're relying zero on his evidence. It's only the only reason why we allow her to do homework is because he came along. But once they came along, it's her homework that we're relying on. Because she knows that she'll get in trouble. She's jeopardizing her whole future if she just goes ahead and marries somebody. It turns out her husband's a lie. Anyway, so what's the difference? How come over there he's allowed to marry? How come there he can't? It's very simple. In the case of a get, even he says nothing, we're not relying on anything he did. There's a get. If the get itself is what does all the work. But over here, it's his word plus her homework, and therefore we're relying on him partially, and that is why. And there's no get, there's nothing to support what happened here, and therefore it doesn't look right. It looks like he has personal gain from his testimony. How do we know there's such a difference? But now we learn. There are certain people that if they come along to a woman and say, your husband died, we don't trust him. His sister-in-law or mother-in-law, maybe they hate her with such a passion, they want to ruin her life, and they're making up these stories. So we don't trust. them on their own. But if they bring a get and say before the nechta, we do trust. Why? What's the difference? Because the get itself supports what they're saying. The get itself supports. Okay, Mace, Raktiv, Hagunu, he said the husband died. I killed your husband. We killed your husband. He says he should not be the one marrying the woman. But everybody else can. Even if he says even though he's incriminating himself, I killed your husband. Anybody else can marry his wife. So you might ask, well, Rabbi Yosef, how can it be? According to Rabbi Yosef, who says we don't split testimony, he's incriminating himself. And when you incriminate yourself, we toss out the entire evidence. So if he says, I killed your husband, how can she get married? We don't trust the word that he said. What's the story that Rabbi said? Rabbi said, if a person says, look, I was raped by another man, was raped, and for Mishkav Zacha, for you get Chayim Misa. And he says, look, I was a victim, against my will. Then his testimony is taken into account together with somebody else, and we're going to kill Reuven, the perpetrator. Even though there's a whole discussion, can you trust him? Because maybe he's an enemy, he hates the guy. Anyway, take it further. Talk about another time. I get to Makas. If he said, I was complicit. In other words, I'm a Russia, just like he is. Then Russia who? We don't trust the word he says. So Abiyazir says, if you're incriminating yourself, we don't trust the word you said. So if he says, I killed your husband, he's incriminating himself. So how can you, in Goyish law, have the same thing? You cannot incriminate yourself. So how in the world can he, what do you call it? Why should she be permitted to marry? What about him marrying her? Nobody should be able to marry her. You can tell me, maybe no, generally you're right, we don't take his testimony, but in this case, we want to help the woman out. She's an aguna. We don't want her to be chained. So therefore, we're going to trust this person, even though he's incriminating himself. Well, Amr Menashe clearly said, Gazlan de Divreim, if the person committed a sin of stealing only midrabban, like playing cards, where you're taking other people's money, and even though I'm telling you the other person put the money down willingly, so there's no Isur Gneva midrabban, and it is an Isur Gneva. According to Rabbi Yehuda, only if you do it as a living vocation. Rabbanan said, why? Because the guy who put the money down didn't really mean it. He thought he'd lose the money, then he wouldn't have played the game. He thought he has a chance of winning. So he reluctantly, he parts with the money. So therefore, you're like a Gazlan with the Rabbanan, then kosher le'edus isha. But Gazlan, they even tell you, if you're a real Gazlan, pasal le'edus isha, you cannot be trusted for a woman, even though it's an aguna. So how come over here, he says, I killed your husband, and the mission says other people can marry? How can that be? So it would seem, does it mean that the Menashe holds like Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda says he's not trusted. Rabbi Yehuda says if he says I killed her, then nobody can marry her. Sounds like Rabbi Menashe holds like Rabbi Yehuda that what? That nobody can marry. That we don't. If you incriminate yourself, even when it comes to aguna, we toss out the whole with testimony. Amalot Rabbi Menashe, no. Here is different. I can also work out according to Rabbanon, but time Rabbanon hachit Rabbanon. Here's something totally different, and that is you cannot incriminate yourself. So we are going to segregate. We're going to divide your testimony into two parts. One part is did Reuven die, and part number two is who committed the crime. So we're going to accept that Reuven is dead. We're not going to accept that you're the one who killed Reuven, because we're going to palgin the Buddha. We're going to divide your words in half. So therefore, Menashe says, Taka, don't trust him regarding himself. But we break up the testimony. We're going to trust that her husband is dead, and therefore anybody else can marry her except him. But anybody else can marry her. Says, you cannot incriminate yourself, so we're going to separate your words. That's what I find. So therefore, Rabbi Menashe and Rava hold like the Tanakama. But Rabbi Yosef, who says that we don't divide your testimony, means that we throw out your whole testimony from court, which according to the Tanakama, others could marry her husband. Must be that Rabbi Yosef holds like Rabbi Yehuda, which is not the halacha. So later, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda, who said that what we don't trust, nobody can marry this woman. Rabbi Yosef says, no, I think I can hold like a chamim, because I believe she's a chained woman, and a chained woman, we are going to, it's different, and we are going to, you could incriminate yourself to help her out. I know that this woman, Rabbanon were lenient, but Menashe is the one who learns like Rabbi Yehuda, but I hold like the Rabbanon, because it's a chained woman, we can make life easier. And Rabbi Menashe says that when it comes to matters of a woman as well, if he's if aid is possible matayda, we're not going to accept it. But Menashe said, I can also go according to Chachamim, because I believe you to break up the testimony, the part we incriminates, throw out, and the part we doesn't, let's believe. It says further, it says in the Mishnah, Haraktiv, he killed him, we killed him to Nase. Now Rabbi Yehuda says, if he said he killed him, we don't believe, but if he said we killed him, it's all right. What's the difference? He killed him or we killed him. He's incriminating himself in both cases. Ma'ishna Haraktiv or Ma'ishna Raguna. What's the difference? Which way you go? Rabbi Yehuda, in both cases, incriminating himself. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, but when he said we killed him, it didn't mean we killed him. It means I was present when he was killed by others. But I was there, but I wasn't involved. He knows he's not incriminating himself. That's why in that case he said we killed him. Other people can marry. You don't because you're the ones giving the testimony. It doesn't look right. So the Gemara Vatanya learned the Baraisa. They said to Rabbi Yehuda, there's a story about this gangster that was taken by to the gallows by the issue decree by the courts that he should be hung in a place called Kapukaya. And he's on the way to the gallows. He said to everybody, "Do me a favor. I'm about to die. Tell the wife of Shimon ben Kohen." Interesting, the son of a Kohen. Ani haraktis baila. I killed her husband. B'chnisasi lelud. Tell her that I killed her husband when I went to Lud, so she's a free woman and she can go free. But Amila, others say, b'chnisasi lelud. When her husband was coming into Lud, I killed her husband. And the Bezdin said we can trust him. He's being killed anyway. We can trust him, and she's permitted. Now the question is, here he incriminated himself that I killed him. Yet we're going to trust him. We say there, and you brought a pasuk that a person is related to himself and a relative cannot take testimony. So why are we trusting there? You got it all wrong. He didn't say I killed him, but I was there present when he was killed. Therefore, he's not incriminating himself. So it says he was a gangster. So she knew they list it. Not that he killed anybody. He was caught because he was a gangster. But and because of the event, and he was with them because he was with the gang. Therefore, he was part of the gang, and they just sentenced him to death. So the Gemara, he's being sentenced to murder, to the gallows, be executed. Doesn't that mean that he's a murderer himself? So the Gemara says no. They didn't come in those days. The courts were not faru. They saw a whole gang. They decided to execute the entire gang. They didn't bother checking who was involved and who wasn't involved. Whether you were an accomplice or whether you were a perpetrator, they didn't care. So therefore, this guy was not incriminating himself at all. Next Mishnah talking about things which that look suspicious. A wise person, let's say a woman comes along and a husband, and she made some kind of a neder. She said, "I don't have anything to do with my husband. I don't have any benefit from her." And the husband went to the Rav, said, "Could you be mat in the neder?" And the Chacham, for whatever reason, said, "No, I can't." And then he divorces his wife. And because he can't live with her, the Rav should not marry her because it looks like the only reason why you're pasking that they cannot annul the neder because you had your eyes on her because it's a shad. Miyana, what happened? The girl was 12 years old and she walked out on her husband. Or the brother-in-law gave her chalitza, and he was one of the members of the bezin. He's allowed to marry her afterwards. Why? The pneishu bezin. He wasn't alone. It was 3 people. There's no way we're going to say we're going to taint the other 2 people because this guy has something benefit. No. When do we say that the shad if he's the only person, the sole arbiter? But if there are other people there as well, we're not going to cast aspersions on everybody else. So the Gemara, it seems the Chacham, because he asked, what would be the Chacham to say to the husband? Yep, no problem. I'll be mata neder. And then the husband died or divorced her, and he wants to marry her. Then it seems to me there's no problem. Why not? There's no shad. But my ask you, we're talking about if we're talking about a single judge, chad mi motzi mata, a single judge, we need a bezdin to be mata neder. So we're 3. In order to be mata neder, you need 3 people. Now it seems in the Mishnah, the 3 people. Now, if there were 3 people and they asked the husband from annulling the neder, but we just said a minute ago, if there were 3 people and only one of them benefits from his psak, we're not choshid, we don't suspect the other 2 were joined, were complicit in all of this. So everything is all right. So why is it that he cannot marry her? Vietnam, we learned me and the Mishnah. Me and we said he can marry that girl, because it's part of a bezdin, and the other 2 have nothing to gain from it. So we're talking about one person. We're talking about We're talking about in the first part of the Mishnah, we're talking about a single person, and a single person sometimes can be mata neder when if he's an expert. We're talking about a yachid mumcha, and therefore he's a single person. And if he says to the husband, "You cannot know the neder tomorrow," he marries her. Obviously, everybody's going to think, he's corrupt. He tilted the rule to suit him. Second, but I mean, if she walked out of the marriage, you got chalitza time with the bezin. It seems the mission because there's a bezin of 3. So a side issue sounds like you need a bezin of 3. But 2, it seems that no. that it has to be a miyun, needs 3 people, and chalitza needs 3 people. By the way, we're learning more gittin that a get does not need a bezin, even though the meaning in the world today is you need a bezin. As I know you, the pasuk is based on the Gemara there in gittin, and the Bava Beis that you don't need a bezin for gittin. So now we're discussing when it comes to miyun, a chalta, you don't need a bezin. Unless the question says, if witnesses were signed on a contract, a sale contract, Bal get isha, or on the divorce of a woman, we're not worried. In other words, even 2 people, if only one of them benefits, we're not suspicious. If 2 people sign on a document that the property is sold, and then he ended up buying the property, we're not suspicious that the whole document is false and he just did it in order to buy it. Because then what's the other witness? What does he gain? A person does not sin unless there's some personal gain. So what do you have to tell me that there's a bezin of 3 and 2 be the same thing? As long as there's another party who's impartial involved, that gives credibility to the whole experience. Says, Mother, you're right, but he wants to teach you a din, by the way, a separate thing altogether. Why does he mention a bezin here? To teach you teach a side issue that miyun requires 3 people. Miyun is not a get. Miyun is something totally different. That you walk out of the marriage as if you never married in the first place. We need a proper bezin, 3 people, and this comes to exclude the opinion that says that you don't need 3 people. Iboy will have a question now. What about konas? All of these cases. And let's say these 2 cases, Chacham and the previous get cases that made. We told the 8 don't marry. What if they did? The rabbi did marry her. Does he have to walk out of the marriage or not? Kanas Ma'oshi, can he stay married or do they have to walk out? Rav Kahana Kanas Maiti just doesn't look right. He should divorce her. And Rav Ashi Kanas Maiti, he shouldn't have married her. You married her, no, because it's not a Aveira. It's only doesn't look right. Okay, once you're married, you're married. Tony learned Papa learns like the one that says Kanas ain't a mighty, you don't have to walk out of the marriage. Is this a logical thing, or this is some kind of a tradition that he learned from his Rebbe? He said to him, it's a very Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, the rumors abounding about that you had a relation with a maid, and then she became free, a Jew, she became a Jewess, or a non-Jewish woman, and his guy that she converted. You shouldn't marry them. But if you did marry, okay, there are rumors, but you don't have to walk out. Alma see from here that rumors alone, it's enough to say to you, don't get married. But if you did, we are not going to force you to get out of that marriage. Berinina is just talk. Just because there's a single witness or the Rav who this, and people are talking and wagging the tongue, that's not enough reason to force someone to divorce his wife. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll continue tomorrow in Mitzvah Hashem.